Hello everyone, welcome to the program. My name is Janet Unterschlag and I'm here to do English with you. But first of all, a big thank you. They've been supporting education for so many years, and without them this program wouldn't happen. Please would you download the education app. Lots of material there, you'll really benefit. And will you follow us on YouTube at Mindset Learn. So we're looking at paper 2 and trying to hit on some of the main things that will help you to do. So the first question in the paper is the poetry essay. And it always has some kind of statement. So it'll give you a statement, and then it'll give you a question based on that statement, and it says a well-constructed essay of 250 to 300 words. So what an essay must have minimum of 3 paragraphs, minimum. Introduction, body, and conclusion. You might want to divide the question up and have slightly shorter body paragraphs. So look at the typical questions. The poem illustrates or the poem examines. In whatever poem it is, the speaker is concerned about whatever. In this poem, something is explored. This would be a theme. The poem illustrates, that would be a theme. And then, this is so typical. Diction, tone, structure, if you're looking at a sonnet like Shakespeare, or It Is a Beauteous Evening, or looking at diction, imagery, tone. So diction is language. So in this one, you could look at the imagery as well, but diction is just any word. So repetition maybe, anything about the language that is chosen. Imagery, there are your figures of speech. Tone, in each case, remember tone is feeling. Do not forget tone is a feeling. And then structure. The examiners want this to be an easy question. You take the topic and you make it your introduction. Just rephrase it in your own words. That's your introduction. Then make sure that you hit the 3 things that they give you. Diction, tone, structure. Diction, imagery. Make sure you mention all 3. And if you have got good notes and you've studied your notes, this really is a gift of a question. Comment it onto the page from what you've learned. It should be easy, quick to plan, and you should be able to get a really good mark. I know not every poetry essay, but it's really meant to be there so that if you've studied, you don't have to worry about those contextual questions. You can put everything you've studied down. But remember, look at the 3 things. You can do all 3 things in each paragraph, or you can do them separately, what you would prefer. So that's the poetry essay. Easy. The topic is the introduction. Now we move to something that's a little trickier, and this is the dreaded literature essay. So I'm going to look at Dorian Gray. I will also look at Pi in a moment, but it doesn't matter. If you're doing Pi, just please pay attention because it's the same approach. All right, so what is it here? It's 400 to 450 words. So we're looking for an introduction. I would say 3 to 4 body paragraphs and a conclusion. But the tricky thing is the topic is not the introduction. So let's look at this topic. What is our key? What are we looking at? Superficial, hypocritical, characters, and society. So when you plan an essay like this, you are going to use the story. Okay, so I'm trying to think how I prefer a mind map, but you might prefer here to say, all right, I have to look at hypocrisy in these characters and in society, and superficiality. So I need to look at superficial characters. So what you would do is you would find as many examples as you possibly can. So this part of the essay is the story, the details from the story, the facts from the story. Remember to be accurate. Don't get the facts wrong. But you're going to use these details to support an argument. And your argument, not the topic. You've got to ask yourself, what makes the characters or the society hypocritical? What makes them? And you've got to develop your own argument. So you might say, all right, let me give some of these facts. Let's say Dorian is superficial. Why? Well, because he's so focused on himself that he cannot sustain a relationship with other people. So you think, all right, Basil Hallward, he rejects Basil quite early, he's cruel to him, he prefers Lord Henry. Sybil Vane is very obvious as to why he can't sustain that relationship. He's not in love with Sybil, he's in love with the characters she produces. You might say, well, what about Lord Henry? Isn't he sustaining a friendship over a number of years with Lord Henry? Well, sort of, but the sense that they never develop any kind of depth in their relationship. So he does not confide in Lord Henry. When he does things, he tells him about Sybil Vane, but only after he has met her. He doesn't tell him what he's planning before that. So you look at as many examples as you can, and you say, all right, so what seems to be the argument that I am developing here? It seems to be that the reason that people are superficial is because of selfishness. So that could be one argument. Then you'd say, all right, but what about hypocrisy? What kind of hypocrisy can I see? So hypocrisy is when you present an appearance, but the reality is different. So you could say, well, Victorian society is hypocritical because although there are societal problems, there are social problems, there is poverty, there is exploitation of the working class, there are terrible areas in Victorian London, they are far more concerned with luxury and with comfort. And although some of the upper class, we meet them at various parties and meals, they certainly profess concern, but their concern doesn't go very far. So do you understand, once again, what seems to be my argument is that Victorian society is far too concerned with appearance and also concerned with luxury and comfort. So in fact, I'm back to the idea of self. So when you are preparing an essay like this, yes, I do want the story, but you are using the story to develop an argument. So each body paragraph, let's say we're going to have 4 body paragraphs, must begin with a topic sentence. And that topic sentence is your argument. Many use P-E-E-L or P-E-A-L. This is the topic sentence. You make a point. That is your topic sentence. That is your argument in each paragraph. Then this is your evidence which you evaluate, your evidence which you analyze. This is the story, the details from the story, but each time you are showing me how these details develop that argument, and the link goes back to the topic. Show me that you have remembered there is a topic that you are arguing. So that's how you structure each paragraph. So your 4 paragraphs, 1 to 4. What is my argument? What is my story? So please, who begins with, well, what the novel is about. Please, I know what the novel is about. You're going to tell me I'm arguing that the characters are selfish. Selfish in that they want luxury or comfort. And then you're going to tell me about Victorian society. Or you're going to say that because they're so focused on themselves, they're not able to maintain a strong relationship with other people, and then you're going to give me examples. And you need 4 points developing your main argument. And then when you've done that planning, introduction is that argument. So don't say, in this essay, I'm going to show that the novel exposes the superficial Hebrew language of the main characters. Don't do that. Say that the novel exposes this, it shows that Victorian society is that, and the characters are the following because of this. And then you break it up into paragraphs. I'm going to look next at an essay from Life of Pi, but before we do that, we're going to take an ad break.
.34 centimeters in length, with a weight of up to 66 kilograms. They have a lifespan of about 8 to 10 years. The capybara is a highly social and can be found living in groups of up to 100 individuals.
Studies, mindset for late night studies. Monday is mathematics, Tuesday sciences, with Thursday and on Thursday. Friday is English, and Saturday and Sunday is a good day to every 10 p.m. till midnight, and again from midnight till late night studies. Mindset.
Welcome back to the program. I want to thank Liberty for making this program possible. They've been supporting education for so long, and we're grateful that we're able to be here. relationships: Richard Parker, his mother, and the French cook. So this essay divides itself very nicely into 3 body paragraphs. I think you would start as usual by planning that essay. So you say to yourself, okay, paragraph 1 is Richard Parker. I would look at the first story in a lot of detail because most of the book is the first story. And you would look at the fact that he needs Richard Parker, let's say, for his physical survival and his mental health, so his psychological survival. And you'd explain why. So here's where you use the details of the story. So he tames him, and he has to feed him, and he has to be careful of him because he's dangerous, and he has to make plans, and so it gives him companionship, and he has an emotional attachment to him, and he gives him a purpose and an interest in life. You give me as many of the details as possible. So our argument would be here is the argument, I'm going to put a big A, is that Richard Parker, or the relationship, let's say, with Richard Parker is necessary for Pi to survive on that lifeboat physically and mentally. That's our argument. Remember, that's our P. And then this is the E, which we've discussed. So it's the E plus the E, or the E plus the A, depending on which peel you're using. And then the link. You must show me, please, that you remember that there's a topic. Right. Second one. Well, here we come to his mother. Now, I much prefer the first story because I think the second story, well, we won't even go into what I think about the second story, right? So his mother, start with the first story, and I think his mother is loving. I think his mother is quite tolerant. She encourages him. She supports him. But you're going to have to go to the second story, and you're going to use those details and explain how that relationship, again, his love for his mother is so important. So once again, you're going to say the relationship, his love for his mother and his mother's love for him are very important to Pi's survival. Then you're going to give me your E plus your E plus your A, and then your L. Now we come to the French cook, and this is the whole of the second story, which is only a few pages, whereas the rest of the book is very long. But you're going to have to do with the French cook and talk about his cruelty, his barbarity. So that's my E plus my E plus A, but he also gets him to eat the biscuits and what have you, plus my link. So the argument will be that the French cook is also very important for his physical, and then possibly you want to say maybe his motivation to survive. We don't want it exactly the same A as we had for Richard Parker, so let's change it slightly. Now, where's the fourth paragraph? I've got to write 400 to 450 words. I really am looking at 4 times 100-word paragraph. Well, let's look back at our topic. Pi's ability to endure my mother and French cook. To what extent? Well, I think there's a big thing that's left out. So I'm now going to go with paragraph 4 is going to be my counter argument, and that's not really a counter argument. You are allowed a counter argument, which means you argue against the topic. Counter, you go against it. This is not really a counter argument, it's like an add-on argument. And I would say that that's religion. That religion is terribly important to Pi's survival because it's so important in terms of his spiritual health, and it gives him emotional support and gives him purpose. Remember, there's a whole chapter devoted to the prayers, and we have the whole thing about the 3 different religions that he subscribes to, because he believes that all 3 religions are dealing with love, and this is very important to him, and he has the rituals of the various religions. And so I would say, yes, that the religion is really, really important to him because he has a sense of the constant presence of God. And that is so important to his survival. And let me just look back at my topic. Do they talk about his survival only? Yes, enduring his ordeal. What I was going to say is that I wanted to extend it to his survival after ordeal. No, go back to my topic. It's just the ordeal. So do you see here, I planned this topic me to have, I think, quite easy argument, and then the French argument there, and then my add argument is that religion is also terribly important to his survival. So this is my next point. Then my conclusion. Remember literature essay, let's just go over that again, that your introduction is your argument. So here you're going to say something like, Pi's relationships are very important to him, and those relationships help sustain him and help him survive. And they're all to do with love, mother, Richard Parker, not sure about the French cook, religion, so based on love, but also, so what shall we say with the French cook? And some kind of, is it too far to go to say inspiration, that he's inspired by the French cook? So something, you need something. That is your introduction. Then you've got your PEA, PEAL each time, and then you've got your conclusion. Okay, right, let's turn to a Hamlet essay. Right, so what we've learned from our essay planning for the novels. Let's just look at the 3 essays that were set in this year. Deception and manipulation are central to the tragic consequences in the play. This is the play Hamlet, right? Next one. Deception and manipulation are central to the tragic consequences in the play Othello. Next one. Deception and manipulation are central to the tragic consequences in the play The Crucible. So do you see the examiners try really hard to make the 2 novel questions very similar and the 3 drama questions similar, because they don't want students to feel, yes, but I wish I'd studied Othello instead of Hamlet. The Hamlet question was so hard, and look forward the Othello question was. So they don't want you to feel that the question in one drama than the other, or the question in one novel than the other. And as you can see, the 2 novel questions that I chose, the hypocrisy and superficiality, are trickier than you need an argument, but you also have to use the story. So if you look at the memo is just a series of deception, manipulation, deception, manipulation, deception, manipulation. That's all it is. So please don't learn a memo and then set out your answer in the same way that a memo is set out, because you have to have an introduction which is an argument and not the topic. It is a response to the topic, Then you have to have your 4 body paragraphs exactly as we have discussed, PEAL, PEEL, and a conclusion. But you can certainly start by saying, okay, who deceives whom in this play? And what are the tragic consequences? Let's just do deception. So, Hamlet. Hamlet deceives. He deceives everyone. He puts on an antic disposition. And you could explain how he deceives Polonius, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, etc. Ophelia. Then you can talk about Claudius. Who does he deceive? Well, he deceives the court, and everybody at the court pretends to be a really genuinely distressed brother, grief-stricken brother. I do see that sometimes people say he pretends to be a wise ruler, but actually he's a flippin' good ruler, so that's not a pretense, but we're not even going to go into that at this point. Polonius, oh, he deceives. He deceives his children because and I would like to bring in manipulation here. He manipulates his children, especially Ophelia, and he spies on his children. Spies on Ophelia, spies on Laertes. Gertrude, does she deceive? Yes, actually, it's one moment where I really like her. She's a mother. And Hamlet says, for heaven's sake, don't betray me to Claudius. And she lies. Claudius, yay, yay, good woman. Right, so you go through as many examples as possible, and you're looking for deception, and you're looking for manipulation. But then you've got to create an argument. You've got to say to yourself, so why are these people lying and manipulating? What is going on here? So you might decide that in the play, fathers manipulate their children for their own purposes. So who would you discuss here? The ghost. And let me be absolutely transparent. I don't like Hamlet's father. So how does he manipulate his son? Well, he uses what we would call emotional blackmail. I'm not sure we should use that term. It's not very academic. But remember when he says, if ever thou didst thy dear father love. So he uses emotional blackmail to get him to commit a murder, which also happens to be regicide, the killing of a king. And he puts huge pressure on his son. Then we've got Polonius. We've already discussed him and Laertes and Ophelia. You'd go into more detail. And you've got a stepfather in this play. And the stepfather is Claudius. And he certainly tries to manipulate Hamlet for his own purposes. First of all, he won't let him go back to university. And he tries to win him over. And now my cousin Hamlet and my son and all of that. So maybe one paragraph would be that fathers manipulate and deceive for their own purposes. You've got to decide on your argument. It might not be the same argument as the child sitting next to you. That's not a problem. What we have not looked at, and maybe we just need to do a text box over here, is what are the tragic consequences? Now, technically, you have discussed tragedy in terms of Aristotle, but I am not sure that this has been discussed. So Aristotle argues that it's a great man or a man with great potential, and he makes the wrong choice, and that leads to his downfall or his destruction. So my second paragraph could be Hamlet. Hamlet is the sweet prince who is put in an impossible situation where he has to decide on what to do. So he has to make a choice. Do I trust the ghost? Do I love my father enough if I think my father is, if I think the ghost is, keep on doing this, if I think that the ghost is my father, do I trust him? And then do I love him enough to commit, as we said, a murder, which is also regicide? Or how do I deal with my conscience? My conscience says that if I love my father, I should obey him. We know that the Bible says, honor thy father and thy mother. But my conscience always also says that murder happens to be wrong, especially when it's the murder of a relative and a king. So what does he do? So I could do a whole paragraph here on Hamlet. So this could be with the tragic consequence that he has to make a choice, which leads to his downfall, in that he is a murderer. Remember that he never intended the murder of Polonius. But once he has murdered Polonius, he knows that he will be damned. God doesn't just say, oh, that's okay, you've murdered somebody, he wasn't a very nice man, it's fine. It doesn't happen like that. He's a murderer, and it leads to his destruction. So you go back to your topic each time, and you say, what's the argument going to be? Now, maybe you feel that the only character in the play that fits this description is Hamlet. Then you might like to argue that the other tragic consequence, how tragic it is debatable. It's not tragic in the Aristotelian sense, but there's a lot of death in the play. So you could look at who dies because of deception and manipulation. Claudius, Gertrude, maybe not, Hamlet, Polonius, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Laertes. There's a lot of death in this play. And you'd explain how lies and deception and manipulation bring these people to their deaths. And you'd need to think about a fourth paragraph, and then you'd write a conclusion. I do want to move on, but I hope that's given you enough of an idea of what to do with Hamlet. So let's look at Othello. So in our Aristotelian sense, if we're looking at body paragraph 1, we're obviously going to look at Othello, a great man who makes the wrong choice. Now, be very careful. I argue that his wrong choice is not believing Iago. Everybody believes Iago. Everybody trusts Iago. His wrong choice is when he decides to murder his wife. That's the wrong choice and leads to his downfall. But once again, be very careful. I've said to you that you will use the story. But you cannot just have your essay saying Iago deceives and manipulates, deceives and manipulates, deceives and manipulates all the characters, Roderigo, Montano, Ludovico, Brabantio. You can't just write an essay where you're basically explaining how he deceives and manipulates Cassio, Othello, Desdemona, Emilia. That is just story. You, as the candidate, need to work out an argument about how deception and manipulation leads to tragedy. So I've shown you that it's the paragraph on Othello, and I think it needs to be a nice, long, solid paragraph on Othello, is that Othello is deceived and manipulated into making a wrong choice, which is the murder of his wife. And then you explain how he's deceived and manipulated, why he trusts Iago, how Iago uses that trust to manipulate him, how he is brought to a pitch of jealousy so that he even has an epileptic fit, and so on. But what are your other paragraphs going to be? So this is where you need to spend time planning. And I know I say to my students, plan for 30 minutes and write for 20 minutes, and they almost have a fit. How can you plan for that long? Because I need to see my argument. I need to see where this argument is going. So you must, you know, what you might want to say is that deception and manipulation, how are they used in the play? So you might argue that it's used to preserve the safety of one of the characters. So you could look at the characters who try to preserve their safety, or to promote their situation. So you'd look at Iago, for example, with Roderigo, Montano, Ludovico, Emilia. So you don't want to overlap all the time. So hang on, what have I just said? Iago and Cassio, Roderigo, Montano, Ludovico, and Emilia. But you don't want every paragraph to be a repetition of the same point. So then you could say, Manipulation and deception are used to destroy reputations. You know how important reputation is in this play. My reputation, Iago, my reputation, Cassio weeps. Right, so destroy reputations. And you would look at Iago destroying Desdemona, Othello's, Cassio's, Brabantio's reputations. He destroys Othello's reputation in Brabantio's eyes. So something like that. I definitely think that an essay on Othello has to deal with Iago very directly. And I was trying to figure out what I would say here. And I was trying to think of academic language. And you cannot write this in an exam. But Iago gets a real kick. And in the end, he realizes, do you remember when he says that he's either going to succeed absolutely or he's going to be destroyed? And he says the end of that night, that last night, is either going to lead to my triumph or I'm going to be finished. And of course, it ends with his destruction. But I really would talk about this kind of, don't say a and rush. I'm trying to think of what you mustn't say. But look quickly at Crucible. Same topic. What are the tragic consequences? So you might argue, so if we're doing Aristotelian, we would look at Proctor, and he really is a tragic hero. So Proctor as the tragic hero, who is. But remember that choice at the end of the play is his redemption. Remember, Elizabeth says, he have his goodness now. But he reaches great heights in making those choices. Not Aristotelian tragedy, but I thought obviously the witch trials you need to deal with in a paragraph. And you're talking about deception and manipulation, obviously Abigail, and the rest of the girls. So the girls in general, but with Abigail at their head. How that leads to the witch trials. And talk about the innocent people, Rebecca Nurse, Giles Corey, Proctor himself, Elizabeth is arrested. What else do you see as tragic consequences? I thought maybe Salem as a community is destroyed. So you go to things like the orphans, the cattle wandering, lack of distrust, broken. So it's the same topic. Remember, our keywords, you should mark your question word and then mark your keywords. Use a highlighter. You may not use a highlighter on your answer script, but use it on the question paper. So it's discuss. So it's usually a 3-mark question because they're looking for something a little bit more. The structure in the tone. So you've got to be able to establish tone, and remember tone is a feeling, and don't say he feels, I don't know, annoyed. You know, say he uses an annoyed tone, right? And remember, you must give me a feeling. You can't say he's feeling that his mistress is better than all the traditional imagery. Okay, you can't say that. I want to know how he's feeling. Name the feeling. And then the shift in tone. So in this one, I would argue that the tone is ironic and mocking. But I argue very strongly, he's not mocking her. He's mocking the traditional images that poets use to describe the woman, and he says, my girl is just human. And here you have sincere admiration. But you must talk about the structure. So the first 12 lines, you can talk about quatrains, and then the rhyming couplet. Right. I do want to deal with irony. When you get a question on irony, you need to say something like, we think something, or we believe something, or we hope something, or we expect something, or whatever. But please use that but, please mark it. And now you're going to give me the contrast. This is the reality. Okay, please. Would you learn that as a template on how to answer an irony question? Please, please. So, the morning sun is shining. The title is ironic. Why? Justify your response. So maybe 2 to 3 marks. So you'd say, the morning sun is shining. We expect it to be a wonderful day. We expect there to be hope and pleasure and life and light and all of those things, but the person is actually grieving for someone who has died. So, irony question. Next one. All right, so I thought if we looked at poem of return and then looked at some typical questions based on poem of return, right. Mood. They often ask mood. Please, mood is a feeling. So if you're asked, question word is discuss. So you always mark the question word and you always mark the keywords. You're being asked for a feeling. Please go back to the lines. So look at the mark allocation. It's going to be one word for describing the feeling, and then the discussion would be, where is the feeling coming from? It's usually a good idea to look at the diction, look at the words, and say, okay, this is the feeling, this is how the feeling is conveyed. So if we go back to the poem, let's say we look at these lines. Always go back to the lines. Highlight the lines on your question paper. So, how is he feeling? He's going to come back and he says, bring me the dews. What is the dew? The tears of dawn. So there's a sense of nature itself mourns. Nature weeps. What for? The dramas, the deaths of these people, of these heroes. If we go down to here, they are the heroes who have fallen at daybreak. So the sense that nature is mourning the loss of those who were fighting for freedom. What is his mood? His mood is sorrowful. Remember, avoid happy, sad, and angry. They are too vague. Try to be more accurate. So mournful, use this. The mood is mournful because he describes the dew that is on the grass in the morning as the tears of dawns, plural, many days, witness the death. So you go to the diction and you explain how the diction creates feeling. Look at the next question. It says, what is my key word? The effectiveness in the context of the poem as a whole. So you've got to look at the image, and this is a 3-mark question. So you're still doing the P-E-E or the P-E-A. Forget about the L. You don't need it. You're still making a point, and you are using the poem to support it. But notice you asked in the context of the poem, so you need to know what the poem's about, and then you look at the effectiveness of the image. So let's choose a line. I think this is nice. Let's use lines 13 and 14. With a wingless stone in hand, in fact, no, let's just line 14. One image, the thread of anger snaking from their eyes. So why is it effective? It shows that even though these soldiers died, they fell at dawn, they died. Nevertheless, their resentment, their anger, their fury will continue. The image suggests something snaking, coming from their eyes and going on into the future. It's a thread of anger. So it's almost like an image of a thread of blood, because anger is also the idea of red, which will continue, which will go on, and their passion. Passion isn't only love, it is intense emotion. Their passion, their hatred, their determination will be passed on. So the image also snaking, an image of even though they have died, whatever they were feeling will continue, and the people that they were opposing will be threatened by it. Right. If we're looking at other contextual questions, this question comes up all the time. Let's get it right. It's place the extract in context. All the examiner wants is what has just happened. Was 3 marks, it's now often only for 2, but it's meant to be your entry-level question, and you're meant to recognize the passage. So don't say this comes from chapter 4 or this comes from Act 2. That's not what they're asking. They do chapter 4 and Act 2. So look at the passage and say, what happened here? You are not describing what is going on in the passage. This is not what's required. It's what has just led up to this passage. So whatever extract you've got, what has just happened. And if you're unsure of how far back do I go, so go like 1 step back, and then 1 step back, 1 step back. And you're thinking of 3 But please, when it says refer to line 7, go back to line 7. Please go back to the passage. Right, so we've got Jesus, Mary, Muhammad, and Vishnu. So you say to yourself, these are the 3 religions that pi follows. So what is the significance? Significance means why it's important. What do we kind of get from this? Why are we being told this? So you would refer to Pi's religions and the fact that he believes that all 3 religions, their central value is love. He believes that God is present everywhere and in all experiences, and so he does not distinguish between these 3 religions, and he follows them, and it's part of his spirituality. Try and make 3 points for 3 marks, but remember, look at your keywords and your question words. Right. Okay, we've got a Hamlet contextual. Once again, our keywords and question words. So, I want red. Sorry, red. So there is my, oh, also how. How is terribly important. Right, and so what am I doing? Refer to those lines. So what I did was I've just repeated them for you. I would go back to my passage and highlight. Right, knowledge of the play as a whole, okay, how these lines reflect Hamlet's dilemma. Obviously, we need to understand dilemma. Dilemma is a situation where you do not know what to do. You're in such a difficult position, you do not know what choice to make. Now, how these lines, how? It's going to be a diction question. This is how. You look at the words. Okay, so what is Hamlet's dilemma? Well, we've talked about this when we were planning the essay. So he is faced with the ghost of his father. He says, be thou a spirit of health or goblin damned. Are you coming from heaven or are you coming from hell? Are you wicked or are you charitable, friendly? So his first dilemma is he doesn't know whether to trust the ghost or not. Is this genuinely the ghost of his father, or is it an evil spirit that looks like his father? So his problem is, that's the first one. And the knowledge of the play as a whole is that the first thing he's got to do is he's got to establish whether the ghost is telling the truth or not. So he's got to set up the play within a play. But then once he's said, okay, it's a ghost, then he's got the problem of does he commit a murder and obey his father, or does he obey his conscience? And one part of his conscience says obey, and the other part says don't commit a murder, referring to the play as a whole. Right, this is Polonius. Do you agree? How do I approach this? Look at each word. Richard, you are a despicable human being. Rash, you're impetuous. You don't think about what you're doing. Intruding, you get involved in other people's business when you shouldn't, and you're an idiot. Okay, then how do you substantiate your answer? Try to find an example of what makes Polonius despicable, spies on his own children, rash, he makes decisions without judgment. He doesn't have judgment. He says, that wonderful line, he says, take this from this if I'm wrong, and he ends up dead. Right? Intruding. He gets involved. He spies. The closet scene. And he is a fool. So you need to find evidence that you support or you disagree with it. Right. So let's just try, about 2 minutes, let's just try to sum up the way we're going to approach this paper. Please, during your reading time, maybe which contextual and which essay you favor. Keep yourself calm. Look at the unseen poem, which I'm hoping to talk about. Remember, your unseen poem, it's the same skills that you use for your seen poem. remember, you've got the skills, you've done the studying. Stop and think, do a bit of planning, don't rush. Think before you write. Plan it in. All 14 poems. Don't do contextual of the drama and of the one drama, one novel, one essay, one contextual. If they cross it out, they don't even